Alrighty, guys, I'm officially okay. I can't do this. I can't, not right now at least. I did the thing that I never do, and I turned up the heat a little bit, and I bumped it from like 64 to 68, and officially, it's too hot now. Now it's too hot. It feels hotter than 68. I do have to admit that. 68 is normally still okay, but this is toasty. This is toasty. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something completely unlike me, which is timestamp. I'm going to be unorthodox. And what I mean by that is I've got this top-down cam here. I'm going to do a review for Moonrakers. The issue is that I took Moonrakers to Thanksgiving with the 3 prototype expansions that I had. And it was such a good hit that my brother had a really good time with it, and he's really enjoyed it. So I sent it out to him in LA. So I don't have my original copy anymore. I do have the Titan Pledge coming in at some point, but I gave away my Moonrakers and expansions to my brother so that he could enjoy it with my cousin in LA and that they could have a good time with it. The only problem is that now I'm doing a review. So I don't have the game with me, which means I can't do stuff. And I did have a viewer who did the wonderful knowledge of telling me that pointing at an empty board for Endless Winter is not actually visually helpful to anchor the viewer in the game as I'm talking about it, since none of the other components are out there except for the base board. So I figured, I hear your criticism, I'll do you one better. I'm going to imagine the Moonrakers stuff in front of me because it's not here. So that's my solution. That was and I spit a little glob right there. And then because I was like, oh, I want to mess with that, then I moved my tea, which then, guys, if you ever get liquid on like a blanket, don't wipe it side to side to clean it. This is just going swimmingly. This is going so well. We're gonna do that, and I'm gonna clean it. This is gonna be a huge timestamp jump for anybody who actively watches all of this intro, which I'm absolutely not gonna cut. Wow, you're a good person. You're like a good friend. You're a faithful viewer in that way, because this is manic. All right, as I said, I don't have Moonrakers in front of me, so I'm going to do you one better, and imagination. Moonrakers is a social negotiation deck building game where you are all acting as these Moonrakers, these kind of like raiders that are going out and mercenary ships going to fulfill contracts, and you're both collaborating with your competition and competing with them, since they are your rivals as well. And what I mean by that is that on each person's turn you have the ability to fulfill contracts. The only problem is that for the large majority of the game, your deck is not well suited to complete these contracts on your own. So, for example, when you have the board, which will bring your contracts out, you're going to have like 8 to 10 contracts or something in play right here from which you can select. When you select one, you can decide to solo that contract if you want to, but given the requirements on it, which coincide with the particular icons you have in your deck, you may not be able to complete it on your own, in which case you need to open up negotiations around the table and say, hey, there are a lot of thrusters here and there are a lot of shields here, and then there are a little bit of reactors. I could probably deal with half of the requirements for this, but I need some help with thrusters and I need some help with shields. Is anyone able to help me out with that? And then people can essentially elect to help you in return for some part of the reward. And the negotiation aspect of Moonrakers is that turn by turn bidding for the ability to participate and complete a contract and join in the rewards. The rewards are going to be a mixture of coins, which help you buy new crew members, buy upgraded cards if you're using some of the expansions, and then also buy ship parts. Ship parts and crew members and the extra cards that you get are the ways in which players in Moonrakers start to diversify their decks from other people around the table. It's where the asymmetry comes into play. Everybody, like in most common deck builders, everybody starts with the same deck. You start with a default loadout of icons. And the way in which you channel or find your own niche is going to be the way in which you can leverage what you're able to do with your deck to other players. Your ship parts give you bonuses outside of your deck. The crew members do special things outside of what each individual card icon applies to. And then also upgraded cards and other expansion elements definitely bring more nuance and more possibility into the conversation. The shift happens about 2/3 of the way through the game when players start to get, 6, 7, 8 points, and they start to reach the higher threshold of 10 prestige points to win. And at that point, the negotiations start to break down naturally a little bit, but that's also at the point when you've ramped up your deck to the point where you are able to start soloing some contracts together. And then also when you include some of the expansions like the Binding Ties, that's when you can start to cash in some of the rewards that you get from working together. If you're using the Overload expansion, that's where some of the increased value of your own deck cards, like cards that may give you 3 actions instead of 2 actions for a reactor, or thrusters that allow you to draw 2 cards and do an action instead of just draw 2 cards. All of your work and effort that you have sustained through the beginning of the game to kind of that crunch point allow you to jump over the hurdle of where negotiation and cooperation breaks down and start to, be a solo act and do some of those low to medium quests depending on what you have. I really enjoy Moonrakers because I feel like every time it's a matter of how can you justify what you're able to offer and get the maximum value returned and it not seem like too much to whoever you're bidding with. So it's a very fun navigation of bidding, negotiation, and social maneuvering because you want max value for what you're giving or what you're doing and bringing other people in on. But you also don't want it to seem too good for you because then someone's not going to want to give it to you. My strategy that I kind of enjoy when I play Moonrakers is in the first half of the game, I really don't focus on points at all because it is 10 short points, so you can ramp up pretty quickly. But my focus is generally on credits and cards, and I try to build an engine that benefits me enough to where once I get started, my momentum is hard to stop, and so I don't really start off early getting a bunch of points. It's a really fun time. I think the expansions add a ton. Overload is an expansion that I will always use because that's the one that adds in the upgraded cards, which feel like a very natural next step for the evolution of the game. And then Binding Ties and Nomad each provide 2 different experiences. Binding Ties is, I wouldn't say necessary. It's more valuable if you have people that typically find it harder to negotiate and work together. Moonrakers is a game that necessitates cooperation to the extent that you help each other until you can figure it out on your own. But if there are people that don't like to work together at the table, Binding Ties is kind of a much more incentivizing structure that allows people to really see the good in working with each other, because as you do, your reputation goes up with whoever you're working with as long as you complete the contract, and then you're able to cash that in for sometimes even full points, but also much more valuable things that you can use on contracts with other people or contracts with yourself, like extra actions, extra cards, negating hazard dice, removing requirement values from a certain type of icon that maybe you're short on. So all of those are quite useful, and it's definitely a fun game. Definitely a fun game for sure, and I have a good time with it. It was probably one of the hits of Thanksgiving for my family in terms of the amount of people who played it and enjoyed it. We played it 2 different times, which for a Moonrakers with 2 expansions, teaching people that haven't played before, it took a while. I mean, each of those games probably took minimum 2 hours, but it was a lot of fun. We had a really good time. So I think Moonrakers does really well. I think what one of the main critiques prior to the expansions coming out was that it breaks down if people don't work together. And I would say, sure, yeah, like I don't know. Other critiques are more valuable to me or more valid, but a critique that is more focused on the genre that a game is in and the necessity of the people playing that game to abide by the like requirements of that genre, then yeah, I mean, I love social deduction games, but social deduction games break down when you play with the wrong people. If you play with people who are so quiet that they never speak up and you can't ever deduce what their role is, or with people who never shut up, i.e. me, and they don't allow other people to converse. Social deduction games break down at that point. But that's not really a design fault of the game. That is where the needs of the game and the personalities of the players engaging with it don't, they don't coincide, or they don't marry together very well. And there's a lot of conflict there where the people are not in the right headspace or the right people for the type of game that is being played. So I understand that was an initial criticism of Moonrakers. I just don't agree with it as a criticism of Moonrakers. I just see that as a space where your game group does not match up with that game. I love Captain Sonar, but there's definitely people I would not play that game with because it's a loud and active and violent game experience in terms of playing Battleship or Sink Your Submarine live action. Like that's chaotic, and there's people that don't mix well with a chaotic game like that. There are people that I would not play Pax Pamir or John Company with. A whole host of people I wouldn't play those games with. But that's not those games' faults. That's just, to me, incompatibility between the players and the games. Sometimes people want to play a game because it's popular, it looks cool, but they're just not the right audience for it. And so I've never felt like Moonrakers was weak as a gameplay because of that, but I do feel that it is very much strong now. It's been bolstered by all of those expansions, which add each of these, new directions to take the strategy. And so I really like Overload and Binding Ties and Nomad. I think all of them are valuable in what they bring to the gaming experience, and I think all of them enrich base Moonrakers. But I also think base Moonrakers is good on its own. So I really like the game. If you're not a social negotiation person, either avoid it or go in knowing what to expect. And, I think that is something that will just be... I just think that's universal. I think that's a universal thing when you're playing games, to know the kind of game that you're about to play and not be upset about it. However, there are sometimes games just don't work for people, which I understand. But Moonrakers works for me. Moonrakers from Ivy Studios is, probably, I would say Moonrakers out of all three of them is probably their most universally or widely going to be accepted game. I think it will hit more crowds than the very beautiful abstract strategy game of Mythic Mischief, and then also the very large sprawling social strategic deduction game Veiled Fate. I think all three of them are awesome in their own ways, but I think Moonrakers has probably got the widest appeal, and I think the expansions only doubled down on that. So really happy with the game. I think it's exceptional. You should check it out. And if you've already played it and you disagree with me, let me know what you think and why. I'm curious. And if you have the opportunity to play any of the expansions, let me know. The only thing I have not tried out yet, which I desperately want to, is Luminor, which is kind of like the either solo or cooperative digital hybrid, exploration of the Moonrakers world, where you're going up against kind of like procedurally generated story elements and moments and challenges. And so I'm excited to try that out, and I think that will give Moonrakers even longer legs, and also expose Moonrakers to people who may not have played the base game to begin with, that they're interested in it because of Luminor. So really smart game, really smart design choices, excellent ways to expand the world with the different expansions, and then with Luminor. It's a big one for me. Big one for me. If I was going to give it like a rating, I would probably say between an 8 to an 8.5 out of 10 in terms of how you're playing it, what you're playing it, and the player count you're at. So definitely such a solid game. Really enjoy it. Hope you guys have a good one. I think that's it for me. I need to go back to doing actual like formats. I should do that one of these days. That makes sense. I should do formats to where the audience has at least an expectation of what I'm going to do. That would make sense. Contemplative timestamp. I'm glad my table's dried off. Timestamp. See you guys.